Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
We're joined for this final segment of Let the Record Show with Bobby Ann Cox, a very distinguished lawyer, a fellow Democrat, I might add, who has the same problem with the Democratic Party in New York as I do, which is taken over by a radical fringe. She changed the nature of her law practice, and I had the opportunity to chat with her over the weekend last Saturday. She changed the nature of law practice because she was so aghast at what was happening to New York City and New York State and the drift of the Democratic Party and its very bad public policies harming New York. So welcome, Bobby Ann Cox, to Let the Record Show. We're very, very happy to have you here. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your background and why you changed the nature of your practice and now doing these great constitutional challenges?
Yes, absolutely. First, thank you both for having me on the show. It's great to be here. I've been practicing law here in New York for 25 years, and my practice before COVID was based in real estate and specifically property tax certiorari work. And so I had always been used to going up against government and agencies and local government. But once COVID hit in March of 2020, and we saw this just really obvious government overreach going on, the lockdowns, for one, were completely outrageous. Cuomo did not have the power to tell people to stay in their homes and shutter their businesses and close schools. And, the lockdowns, 2 weeks to flatten the curve was what he originally said. But we all know that lasted months and was destroying the economy in New York. I saw this going on, and I knew instinctively, as an attorney, I just knew this was not possibly legal. So I started to get involved with the constitutional law side of things. And it was really, in 2021, it was really obvious to me with this isolation and quarantine procedures regulation that somebody had brought to my attention that the executive branch had gone wild.
Tell us about what this quarantine regulation was, the Hochul Department of Health state quarantine regulation.
Yeah, so this was a regulation, and just, so your listeners understand the difference, a law comes through the legislature. Our state senators and our state assembly members pass the laws, but the agencies which sit under the executive branch, they sit under the governor, Department of Health, Department of Education, Department of Transportation. Those are all agencies in the executive branch. They make regulations. Another word for that is rules. And this was a rule or a regulation made by the Department of Health. This did not go through the New York State Legislature, but it gave the Commissioner of Health in New York State the power to pick and choose which New Yorkers they could lock up or lock down. Now, they could have locked you down in your home, or they could have removed you from your home with the force of police and put you into a facility of their choosing.
And if they came to my home and I didn't want to go with my wife and children, what would happen to me?
They could arrest you.
So in other words, they're claiming it was a lawful arrest pursuant to this administrative regulation, and I had no choice but to submit and to go with them. Now, what happens if I decide I want to get out? I didn't like being quarantined in some dorm somewhere. How did I get out?
Well, this regulation said that the Commissioner of Health, or whoever she appointed, could tell you how long you would be locked up or locked down. So they arbitrarily would decide how long you sat there in either in a facility or in your home. And there was no procedure for you to get out once you were in quarantine.
So there's no regulatory, in other words, there's no way to make an application to this regulatory body, the Department of Health. What about going to court? Would I have to get a writ of habeas corpus or something like that to get myself out of this lockup?
Right. So we had oral arguments last year in front of the trial court judge, and that was an exact question that he asked the Attorney General's office. He said, let's say you take a family, let's say you put them into a facility, a hospital, for example. Once they're in quarantine, how do they get out? And, there was a really pregnant pause. And then finally, the Attorney General's office said, well, I guess they could hire a lawyer and they could sue us. So they literally said, you need to hire a lawyer and file an Article 78 proceeding against the Department of Health to get out of quarantine. I mean, it's unbelievable.
And how do you do it? How do you do logistics when you're isolated, you're by yourself, you don't have real access to your accounts or family, friends, or connections. You're locked away in some facility. And how do you get a lawyer to get you out?
That's right. That's exactly right. And the judge wrote that in his decision. He said
good.
exactly
good.
that.
Good. It's a good thing I used to be a judge. I asked the right question.
That's right.
Jesse,
That's
your
right.
turn.
Ms. Cox, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for your great work on this. I mean, it really is work for all of our freedoms and such. As you were going through the analysis of this, where did you see the breakdown was where it seemed where the legislature abdicated its responsibility in this, and why they were so silent on allowing this to move forward? Obviously, the constituents in these jurisdictions must have reached out to them and said this is not playing fair. Where do you see the problem where the legislature failed in truly being a checks and balances?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I believe the masses, I mean, some New Yorkers did know about this regulation, but the masses did not. And so when I read this regulation, right, and I said, somebody showed it to me and said, is this for real? Like, this is crazy. And I read it and I said, unfortunately, it's for real, but there's no way it's legal. And it was a situation where I had to come up with a cause of action because, they weren't actually, the Department of Health wasn't actually enforcing this. They weren't removing people from their homes that I knew of, and putting them into facilities. So, to have a cause of action, you have to have an injury. And the injury that I thought of was, well, the legislature is being injured here because the governor and the Department of Health have made a regulation which breaches separation of powers, right? We already have a quarantine law. We've had a quarantine law for 70 years here in New York State, right? Most states, if not all states, do have a quarantine law, but that law is full of due process protections, right? The number one thing that law says is that the person has to actually have the communicable disease that you think they have. This regulation, they didn't even have to prove you were sick, let alone, exposed to a communicable disease. So my plaintiffs in this case are a group of New York State legislators.
Who were they?
That's Senator George Borrello, Assemblyman Chris Tague, and then Assemblyman Mike Lawler, who's now Congressman Mike Lawler, and together with a citizens group called Uniting New York State. And of course, the Attorney General had challenged our standing, but we won on that point. And now the governor is appealing, and they're hitting heavy on the standing. They're trying to knock out the case.
So
on
have
appeal.
they? So they've stayed. Am I correct? They've stayed the implementation of this regulation.
The regulation has been struck down. It's no longer in effect, and they cannot enforce it.
Right.
So the regulation no longer exists, but now that the state is appealing, they want the power back. So we'll see. We're in the 4th Department Appellate Division up in Rochester, and those oral arguments are coming up in September. But this case goes far beyond just quarantining, forcibly quarantining people that may or may not be sick. For however long the state wants. If the appellate division reverses this decision, it is going to send a signal to agencies around the state and probably outside New York State as well, telling them that they can make any kind of regulation they want, any rule you want. It doesn't matter if it conflicts with existing laws. It doesn't matter if it conflicts with existing, constitutional provisions. Just do what you want, and this case is precedent now, or at least it's you can do whatever you want agencies, and, what is that going to do? That's going to completely destroy separation of powers, because separation of powers is 3 co-equal branches of government. And if the executive branch can start making rules that conflict with laws made by the legislature, we are in big trouble.
Well, let me ask you this question, which is something that, again, you and I chatted about over the weekend, which is a matter of great concern to Chairman Garcia and myself. We live in New York State. It's a one-party state. And what's the implications of having a one-party state? So you've been fighting for separation of powers, but in a very real sense, how do you have separation of powers and checks and balances when you have a one-party state?
Yeah, that is a huge problem that we are facing in New York. For the past 5 years, the Democrats have had a supermajority in the New York State legislature. Anybody that's not clear what that means, it just means that there are so many Democrats sitting in our state Senate and in our state assembly. Even if the governor wanted to veto a bill that the state Senate and the assembly passed, the Democrats could override the veto because they have a supermajority. They have so many members of the Democratic Party in there. That is so dangerous, because when one party has complete control, right? They've got the supermajority in the Senate, supermajority in the Assembly. They've got the governor's mansion, and they've got the Attorney General's office. So it's one party rule on steroids. You don't have two sides in an equation there. You don't have a conversation going. You have one party saying what they're going to do. If you don't like it, tough, leave, right? We have to break that. We have to get back to some sort of balance of power.
Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for an Oikos remix. Like a crunchy storm of sea salt praline pretzels, dark chocolate, and butter toffee, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 Oikos Remix varieties with epic mix-ins and 11 grams of complete protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See RemixYogurt.com.
We're shipping Mother's Day gifts with a rapid-fire round of questions. Ready?
Yes, my gift. Can you pack it?
Yep.
Ship it?
Yes.
Guarantee it?
Of course.
Oh, send gift baskets?
For sure.
Protect electronics? Dog-proof it? Return it if they hate it?
Yes, no, and yeah.
Are you the UPS store?
Hey, we have a winner!
Visit the upsstore.com/guarantee for full details. Most locations are independently owned. Product services, prices, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS Store. Visit a store today.
Well, it's even more troubling, and Jesse and I have been talking about this on our show for a long time. One of the things you could hope is that you have an independent judiciary that would be a check against overreach by the legislature on constitutional measures, as well as by administrative agencies and the governor. And what's happened is you have the leadership of the Democrats in the state Senate using their power of advice and consent over judicial nominees, and particularly the Court of Appeals, where they blew out the chief judge of the state of New York, and she resigned. They rejected the nomination of Governor Hochul's first choice, an esteemed judge, and they made sure that they got in somebody who they thought, and I don't know the gentleman, I have no idea about him. He's supposed to be a very decent person, a very smart, good law person. I don't know. But they made sure that they got rid of people who they thought might be adverse to their positions, which raises the question, there is no checks and balance even in the sense of an independent judiciary, because the legislature is going to control who's on the bench, and there may be result-oriented decision going along with their political, ideological agenda. What do you say about that?
Yeah, the politicalization of our courts is extremely dangerous. We absolutely have to reverse that trend. We cannot have the courts are supposed to be the branch of government that decides, when the other two branches are fighting over power issues, it's supposed to be the judiciary that decides that dispute, right? And it's supposed to be in accordance with our Constitution. So
good luck with that.
Yeah, well, we can't have this one-party slant where the Democrats are trying to maneuver or control or manipulate what goes on in the courts. That is so dangerous. People have to understand the importance of voting. And, it's really not about left or right, Republican or Democrat. It's about being an American, and it's about upholding our Constitution. We are in big trouble if we don't break this one-party rule. The New York State Senate, we only need 11 seats to flip that state body from Democrat-controlled to Republican-controlled. 11 seats throughout the whole state of New York. And elections are next November. It's about, 13, 15 months from now. It's definitely doable, and that has to be the goal. Look, even if it was the Republicans with a supermajority and they were the ones that were going,
you'd be saying the same thing.
I'd be saying the same thing.
Of course you would. Jesse, I'll give you the final word. I've just gotten that sign from Kevin.
Yeah, we were talking about the separation of powers and such, but and the judiciary being politicized and such. But what concerns me with this is the fact that they're establishing a far more powerful entity, and that's the entrenched bureaucracy within these agencies. That it's a pencil pusher, an unelected individual that can simply establish a new regulation if this case is not successful at the appellate division. Am I right in that?
No, you are 100% correct. We run the risk of having, people call it a regulation nation, right? So it's the regulations being made by, like you said, unelected bureaucrats sitting in these agencies. They're not elected. You can't vote them in and out. If they do things that you don't like, they make rules or regs that you don't like, you can't go to the polls and vote them out. They're appointed. So that's the whole reason why we have separation of powers. We're supposed to be able to vote in and out the people that make our laws. The people that make regulations sitting there in agencies, they're not supposed to have this incredible power. They're not supposed to be able to undo what the legislature is doing. That's tyranny. When one branch of government, the executive in this case, takes a power that belongs to another branch, that's tyranny. We cannot have a tyrannical situation in the state. If this happens in New York State, it's going to spread to other states in our country, without doubt. New York is the trailblazer, whether for good or for bad. What happens in New York spreads.
It's California and New York. It's two coastal states that have always been the leaders in these trends. Well, Bobby Ann Cox, Esquire, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Jesse and I would love to have you back to talk to you about the future of our city and our state. I'd love to see a good victory for you in the appellate division, and hopefully, if it goes to the Court of Appeals, an honest decision from the Court of Appeals sustaining your earlier victory and protecting the public and the people of this great state. This has been Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia. We've just finished our conversation with Bobby Ann Cox, Esquire, a great lawyer and a great patriot, and we appreciate you being here, Bobby, and thank you for coming on.
Yes, thank you both for having me. I appreciate it.
Today's episode is sponsored by NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast. Making financial decisions shouldn't feel like picking a TV show. Too many options, too much hype, and no way to know what's actually good. NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast cuts through the clutter. Their finance journalists break through real-world money decisions with clear research-backed insights. From investing to home buying to credit cards, the nerds help you navigate major financial decisions with confidence. Leave TV to fate. Leave your next financial move to the nerds. Follow NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast wherever you listen.